This is Steve Hannley.
This is Kevin Dunsmore.
Kevin, gotta ask you, if you only had one animal, so to speak, you could have your entire life as a pet, as a friend, as a companion, as a lover, perhaps, if that's the way you want to swing with this animal comparison, would you choose a dinosaur or would you choose a mammoth?
First off, no bestiality.
Well,
second, probably the dinosaur.
Is it bestiality if it's a hypothetical with an extinct species? I mean, is that really bestiality?
Yes.
I don't think so. I mean, what it's impossible. It's like saying, you know, would you want to have a relationship with an alien from Quadrar 5? It's not real, so it can't be considered. Like if it was a male alien, right? It wouldn't be homosexual because it's not a real thing. So I don't think that can be considered bestiality.
I don't think your logic makes much sense.
Okay. So Far Cry Primal, that game has a mammoth.
Yes, it has lots of mammoths. It has herds.
Are they attractive?
They're woolly.
Well, so they're like the bears of the Stone Age world.
No, because there are also bears.
Oh. Are there saber-toothed cats?
Yes, there are saber-toothed tigers, there are crocodiles, there are deer, there's almost anything you can imagine.
So the first thing I have to ask you is that in this game, Far Cry Primal, is this a Jurassic Park kind of a situation where there's been some sort of a amusement park opened up with all these Stone Age creatures, or does this game actually take place in the Stone Age, so to speak?
This game does take place in the Stone Age. Basically begins with a countdown timer. It starts at 2016 and counts all the way down to 10,000 BCE.
What is that? I mean, are you going back in time, or is that just how you start the game?
That's how you start the game. That's how they basically tell you that this game takes place in the past.
But you're not. It's not an Assassin's Creed situation where you're traveling through time. This is literally just a snapshot of this period of time.
Correct. You are in this time period. There are lots of Assassin's Creed references, but you are Takar in 10,000 BCE, trying to take back your homeland of Oros.
Now, one thing that's always been really appealing about the whole Far Cry franchise is that even though it's an open world, where you usually think about open world games, and there's not necessarily the best story, of course. Games like Grand Theft Auto have a really nice story in them, but most open world games, it's more about the gameplay. But Far Cry Primal seems like its predecessors in the fact that, well, there's quite a bit of story in here. Is that true? And how exactly does the story unfold over this game?
It's a pretty straightforward story. It's a story about survival and man versus man. How it is like how we have man versus man today is the same back then. There's not a lot of twists and turns. You can kind of see it coming. The strength of the story is the actual characters. Ubisoft put in a lot of effort meeting with different historians and linguists to kind of come up with their own language and body language that they had their actors mocap. It's pretty compelling. The actual narrative isn't that compelling, but what's going on inside the world with the different characters and how you as Takar interact with them is very interesting.
So now, do the characters actually speak with their own fully fleshed out language in the game?
Yes, there is no English whatsoever, no French, no German. This is a language that Ubisoft worked with linguists to create, since obviously there was no recorded text back then. They kind of worked with the linguists and the different European dialects to create what they believe they would have spoken back then.
Now, I wonder if that's accurate because the movie Quest for Fire, I don't know if anyone's seen that, I believe it was in the late 70s, it did not feature a language at all, if I remember correctly, and I've fallen asleep in my fair share of social studies classes, but I seem to remember that there was no language in the Stone Age, and that people communicated with body language and with kind of animal-like grunts. I don't know if that's true. Did you know about if that's true, Kevin?
When I spoke with Ubisoft before, basically the historians they talked with they didn't know. We don't know today because there is no written text. We don't know with 100% accuracy whether there was a language or not. In terms of a design perspective, though, it was smarter for them to create a language because that's the way that we as the player can interact with them. If they were just doing body language, I'm not sure if people would be able to stay interested in the story.
That's fair. Now, the biggest question that I would have about this game is how exactly does it compare to past Far Cry games, and what exactly is different in the game?
Well, first off, the biggest difference is that it takes place in the Stone Age. No guns, no cars, no crazy explosives. What you have are bows, spears, clubs. It surprisingly works. It feels like a Far Cry game without that stuff. In place of cars, you can unlock the ability to ride certain beasts. Instead of a binoculars or camera to kind of tag enemies in the field, you can now summon an owl with your Beastmaster ability. Overall, it fits pretty well into the Far Cry universe, even though at first glance you're like, what is this? Why is this being labeled as a Far Cry game?
Now, you said that you use a eagle to tag enemies and also...
Owl.
Oh, an owl. Well, they're close enough. They're both birds of prey.
Eagles are enemies in this
So
game.
there are eagles in the game.
They are, but you can't tame them and you can't use them.
Can
Your
you hunt,
owl
can
is
you
your
hunt
friend.
them? Can you hunt the eagles?
Yes,
Do
if
you use a
you
bow
are
and
lucky
arrow?
enough to get one.
Oh, fantastic. So there's no viewpoints, is that correct? You can't climb a tower and see more of the world?
That's correct. Something Ubisoft Montreal is doing with Far Cry Primal is to try and get away from that kind of established Ubisoft formula where their games kind of all follow the same design pattern. And one of those ways was to get rid of those viewpoint towers. Basically, as you roam around the world, you're slowly uncovering it in a fog of war mechanic.
So that means that as you keep walking in the direction you haven't been, you'll uncover more of the map, which was previously fogged.
That's correct, and then you can also unlock skills that increases the radius at which you discover more of the world. So it's nice to not have to search for these watchtowers all the time.
Now, because there's no modes of transportation like Far Cry 3 had a buggy, and of course there was the, a parasail, or hang glide, I guess. Is the world smaller because you seem like you move a lot slower? So, do you know if the total area of the game map is smaller than Far Cry 4 or Far Cry 3?
It's actually similar in size. I spoke to Ubisoft about it because I kind of raised the same concern, and they basically told me that the size of the map is comparable to Far Cry 4, which I would agree with. It does take a while to traverse, but there are options to make it faster. For one, you can capture campsites and outposts, and those serve as fast travel points. And then also, a little bit later in the game, you can unlock skills that allow you to ride things like woolly mammoths and saber-toothed tigers.
Now, you have to stop right there and talk about riding a woolly mammoth. Can you actually tame and ride a mammoth?
You cannot tame a mammoth. You can only tame creatures like cats and dogs. They're going for the whole domestication thing. You can't domesticate a woolly mammoth, but with wolves and the big cats, those are kind of the predecessors to our current versions of dogs and cats, so those can easily be domesticated. With mammoths, you basically have to approach them and hope they don't charge you in order to ride one.
So if you do ride one, how long does that last? Does it last as long as you want it to, or do they eventually get kind of tired of you being on them and butt you off?
It lasts as long as you want to, or maybe like a cutscene activates, or an enemy kills the mammoth. Now, there are times where you do get kicked off, like if you're trying to take it off of a cliff, it will kick you off.
Now, what if you get off the mammoth? Can you get back on easily, or would you have to retame it?
You can get back on easily. You just have to make sure it doesn't walk away because it will.
Okay. So it has a mind of its own still.
Yes.
Can you fight other mammoths while riding a mammoth?
In a messed up sort of way, yes.
Are there baby mammoths you can ride?
No, they're all full grown.
Oh. You'd think that a baby mammoth would be quite adorable.
Maybe, but then you kind of get into the whole ethical issues of killing a baby.
True. Now, are there also saber-toothed tigers and cave bears in this game?
Yes, there are all kinds of animals. You have your wolves, you have your big cats, you have your saber-toothed tigers, and then there's also bears and honey badgers. And all of those can be tamed. There are even legendary versions of them you can find and tame. So there's quite a bit for you to discover and potentially tame as your own.
Now, I believe that Far Cry Primal is the first Far Cry game to be developed for the ground up for the Xbox One and PS4, because Far Cry 4, even though it felt like a current-gen game, it was also developed for 360 and PS3. Do you feel that with Primal? Does it feel like an evolution for the series?
Graphically, yes. This game looks fantastic. It's definitely one of the best-looking games that Ubisoft has ever put out.
Wow.
I definitely like wandering through the forest. I wouldn't say it looks as good as like Star Wars Battlefront, but it's still a really, really good-looking game, and they didn't have to hold back because of last-gen ports.
Now, does this feel like a main series Far Cry entry, or does it feel more like a spin-off, kind of like Blood Dragon?
I think this is a full main entry. I don't know what Ubisoft's plans are. I don't know if they're going to go back to numbered entries or if it's going to be kind of like Assassin's Creed or Call of Duty, where they just drop the numbers. But this does feel like its own game. It feels like it's pushing the franchise forward more than Far Cry 4 did. Overall, it definitely feels like it should be Far Cry 5, but they declined to give it a number.
Now, the past few Far Cries I played, it took me a long time to beat the game. We're talking maybe 30 to 40 hours. Now, granted, I didn't exactly run through it and just do the main campaign missions, but still, I feel like if I would have, it still would have been maybe a 15 or 20-hour game. How long would you expect Primal to last the average player and also to last the player who just wants to do the main objectives?
Primal is a very different beast from Far Cry 4. It has a much more open design where basically you have your two main characters, which are Sayla and Tensei. Tensei mostly gives you missions against the Izila tribe, and then Sayla gives you missions against the Udam tribe. And you could technically ignore everything else and just focus on them. In that case, it's a pretty short game, except you're going to get beaten badly. There are other characters that you can find in the world to bring back to your tribe, and each of them has their own set of missions, and that's gonna really lengthen the game, especially late game, because you do get two other characters who I won't spoil, but they do add more missions on top of that. So overall, if you want to go through the main story, you could probably complete it in a few hours, but you're going to get beaten a lot, and it's going to be really frustrating. If you keep going with the characters and you do all their missions and you're consistently upgrading your skills and your crafting abilities, then this is going to take 12, 15 hours maybe to get through all those missions. And then you have a lot of the open world stuff you can do.
Now, one of the major pieces of criticism leveled at Far Cry 4 was that it felt too similar to Far Cry 3. So in many ways, Primal is a breath of fresh air for the franchise, because it really does turn on its head. I mean, we're talking, again, 10,000 BC. It's a very different setting, and it's a very different game. in the future of Far Cry games, if let's say they go back to numbered entries and we have a Far Cry 4, or even if they count this as
Far Cry 5.
Sorry, Far Cry 5, or even if they count this as Far Cry 5 and we have a Far Cry 6, would you like to see the game kind of go back to how it was in 3 and 4, where you had mainly a jungle setting and it's a modern setting, or would you like to see Ubisoft continue to develop games that are like Primal? So maybe we have a game that's, with vampires in Victorian London, or in the Jurassic Age where you have dinosaurs running around. It's things like that, completely different settings. Would you prefer to see that?
I think at this point, Far Cry is very much like Assassin's Creed. I think Ubisoft now realizes they can take it almost any time in the world, and with Primal, they can take it to any time period in the world and still make it feel like a Far Cry game. So I would definitely like them to continue seeing. I'd like to continue seeing them try new things. The original Far Cry was almost like a supernatural thing with special powers, and then Far Cry 2 tried to go super real, and Far Cry 3 kind of toned that down and decided to focus more on the story and the villains, and then Far Cry 4 finally took us out of a tropical jungle and into mountains. So each entry has been about trying something new so far, and I'd like them to continue that in the future.
Well, fantastic. Far Cry Primal will be available on February 23rd for the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, and on March 1st for Windows PC. Kevin, it was a pleasure, and I really do hope that you're able to kill many mammoths and many saber-toothed tigers in your future.